signs of caregiver burnout and how to address them. I'm Dr. Joe Servin. Join me tomorrow at 4 for What's Health Got to Do with It, only on WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville.
The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
This is WJCT Johnnie Mae Chappell. We talk about all that and more with our panel of journalists on our Friday Week in Review. Later, the modern-day musical take on Romeo and Juliet. We preview the local production of West Side Story. You can join the conversation on air by calling 904-549-2937 or emailing firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can also reach out on social media. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
From NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. Israeli authorities say a body returned yesterday by Hamas is not the hostage who the militants say that it was. 4 bodies were handed over yesterday. One of them was supposed to be that of hostage Shiri Bibas, but it wasn't. Israel says the body does not belong to any known hostage. The handover is part of the ceasefire deal. 6 living hostages are also supposed to be handed over tomorrow, and scores of Palestinians are supposed to be released from Israeli prisons. NPR's Hadil Al-Shalchi says currently that is still scheduled to happen.
NPR talked to an Israeli official who's familiar with the matter, but they weren't authorized to speak publicly. And we were told that Israel is actually inclined to move ahead with Saturday's prisoner exchange. They said Israel just doesn't want to jeopardize the release of the Israeli hostages this weekend. But then the official also said Israel is going to take advantage that Shiri Bibas's body wasn't returned as a point of negotiation to ask for more hostage releases.
NPR's Hadil Al-Shalchi reporting. Many of the 178 Venezuelan migrants recently sent to Guantanamo Bay have now been repatriated. NPR's Jasmine Garst reports.
A spokeswoman for DHS said 177 migrants have been sent back to Venezuela and 1 brought back to an immigration facility in the U.S. The move to hold migrants at Guantanamo was controversial. In recent days, immigrants' rights lawyers went to court to seek access to the detainees. The Trump administration alleged that many were members of the international criminal organization Tren de Aragua, which has been recently designated as a foreign terrorist organization. But in an official statement from the colonel running the operation, it is now revealed that 51 of the detainees were considered low threats. Jasmine Garst, NPR News, New York.
A federal judge has ruled against labor unions that sued to try to stop the Trump administration's layoffs of federal employees. NPR's Ryland Barton reports.
The union sued to stop 3 Trump initiatives, firing federal employees on probationary status, plans for large-scale reductions in the federal workforce, and the deferred resignation program. U.S. District Judge Christopher Cooper said he didn't have jurisdiction over the claims and that unions would have to bring their claims before an independent agency that governs labor issues in the federal workforce. The judge did note that the first month of the administration has been defined by executive actions that have caused, quote, disruption and even chaos in widespread quarters of American society. Several other lawsuits over Trump's actions continue. Federal courts have had mixed decisions so far. Ryland Barton, NPR News.
The man accused of killing United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson last year in New York will appear in a state courtroom today. Luigi Mangione is facing several murder counts and another of an act of terrorism. He's pleaded not guilty. Today's hearing is for lawyers to provide a status update on the case. This is NPR.
You're listening to WJCT News, 89.9 in Jacksonville. Good morning, I'm Stephen Ponson. It's now 9:04. The JTA Skyway Express will be closed for the next 2 weeks beginning on Monday. The 2-week-long maintenance project on the Skyway's downtown and San Marco links means the JTA will provide shuttle bus services at its 8 stops. The closure runs from Monday through Friday until March 7th. Florida's new Attorney General is filing a federal court lawsuit against Target, claiming the discount store chain misled investors by promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Before it scaled back its DEI efforts last month, Target was considered a corporate advocate for the rights of Black and LGBTQ plus people. The retailer's decision in 2023 to roll out LGBTQ plus merchandise for Pride Month outraged some shoppers and sparked confrontations in some stores. Florida Attorney General James Uthmeier argues in the lawsuit filed on Thursday that the backlash ultimately cost shareholders. He alleges Target violated the Securities Exchange Act by failing to disclose the known risks of diversity initiatives. Following the cold start to the day here in Northeast Florida, it's going to be chilly this afternoon. Highs will reach the lower 50s. We'll have sunny skies and breezy conditions as well. Have the jacket for your Friday night plans. Temperatures will drop into the mid to lower 40s after sunset with clear skies and eventually get into the lower 40s overnight.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Skoll Foundation, dedicated to powering social innovators to transform the world. Learn more at skoll.org. And the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation at rwjf.org.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Opinions expressed on the First Coast Connect Week in Review are those of our panelists and do not reflect the views of WJCT News 89.9.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and it's Friday, which means it's time for our First Coast Week in Review here on First Coast Connect. Among our topics today, First Coast officials line up behind the new administration's deportation plans. A land swap involving the former Jacksonville landing draws controversy. A new UNF poll shows support for the new administration's agenda. City officials honor civil rights martyr Johnnie Mae Chappell. And could the governor eliminate state property taxes? To talk about all that and more, we're joined by Tenikka Hughes, anchor at Action News Jax. Good morning, Tenikka.
Good morning.
We're joined by Will Brown, race and poverty reporter at Jacksonville Today. Hi, Will.
Good morning, Ann.
Ariel Schiller, reporter at News4Jax. Welcome back, Ariel.
Thanks, Ann.
And John Daigle, political consultant, former reporter, and owner of Daigle Creative. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Ann.
So immigration became a local topic in City Hall this week, Ariel. Two city council members proposing bills to crack down on undocumented residents. Jacksonville Sheriff's Office also falling in behind this plan. What is the sheriff proposing? What are lawmakers proposing?
So Council Vice President Kevin Carrico filed legislation called the Jacksonville Illegal Immigration Enforcement Act. He crafted it with the sheriff's office. Basically, it's going to provide funding to the sheriff's office for 25 fingerprint readers to help with their the sheriff's office efforts. And then it's also going to make a law to make it a local crime for someone in the country illegally to enter or reside in Jacksonville, kind of in line with what President Donald Trump and the Florida state legislature have proposed.
Sort of an anti-sanctuary city law, keeping in with laws that kind of exist at the state level. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. So, I mean, this is kind of following what, like I just said, the Florida state legislator was proposing. And, I think it's just the council vice president's way of supporting the sheriff's office and what they're trying to do with immigration enforcement.
Councilmember Rory Diamond also kind of weighing in on this issue. What did he propose?
That's a great question. I did not talk with Rory about this, but yeah, I mean, it's not surprising. He generally falls on that side of the aisle.
Yeah, this is an issue that I guess is generating, a lot of discussion. John, it's not something we've typically seen at the local level. I think that the Diamond proposal would basically require documentation or some proof of residency to access services like homeless services or food services.
Yeah, I mean, I give Carrico and Diamond and Waters credit for being wise politicians. I mean, obviously they're reading the room, correctly at this moment. That for whatever reason, at least on the GOP side, anti-immigration is a good place to be if you're a Republican elected official right now. So from my uniquely political lens. I give them credit for being smart politicians. Will it make Jacksonville a safer city? I don't know. I haven't seen anything in the proposals that convinced me that any of this is more than just reading the political room, and I don't know that anything I've heard is going to make the city necessarily a safer place, which is Waters' number one job. But he is a very astute, wise political figure in this town, and like I said, I think he's reading the room correctly at the current moment.
Yeah. And Tenikka, Sheriff TK Waters has been appointed to something called Florida State Immigration Enforcement Council. And that's something that was an outgrowth of this recent legislative session that was called by the governor. And then sort of they reached some agreement with the legislature about how to approach immigration. But this council is supposed to represent law enforcement around the state. And Sheriff Waters is one of basically four
exactly
sheriffs
that were appointed. And as you said, this is a part of the governor's overall immigration crackdown, and the sheriff is in support of these efforts as well. And we've talked to him about that. One thing that I think is interesting to note in this conversation, our Jake Stowe fan did some reporting on this as well, and he noted that this isn't the first time that we've seen a local push to mirror a state law. We saw this when there was a push by Democrats to enact hate crime legislation. And at the time, Republicans argued that there was redundancy. We didn't need anything on the local level because we already have state laws that apply. And so now we're kind of seeing the opposite happen, where there is some redundancy potentially. I know the mayor mentioned that when we talked to her about it, saying we have it on the state level. We don't necessarily need it on the local level. So there has been a shift in that thinking. But I think, as John says, they're falling in line with kind of reading the room and what the sentiment is statewide.
That's an interesting comparison. I noticed too, Will, that the sheriff of St. Johns County, Robert Hardwick, has also been, weighing in on the issue of immigration. He was on Fox News recently talking about his county's commitment to partnering with ICE officers, doing patrols. He said they were really cracking down on I-95. And so this is not just a Jacksonville sheriff interest, but one that we've seen reflected in other counties.
The thought of the St. Johns County Sheriff having a super crackdown on immigration just leads me to think, now all those fields out in Elkton and Hastings and Armstrong, did you think this through? I mean, a large part, not a good part of St. Johns County's economy is agriculture. And if we are being completely transparent and honest, there's more than one person who may be in the country illegally or may not have all the documentation for it. And that folks work extraordinarily hard. I've been out in the fields. I've watched people work hard. They provide for their families. They're law-abiding people who just want to work. They just don't have all the documentation. So for the St. Johns County Sheriff, I don't know if it's always fully been thought through down in St. Johns County, the full reverberations of a complete total crackdown and what impact that might have on their agriculture economy, on their schools, and other areas that are St. Johns County staples in ways that St. Johns County broadcasts itself to the world.
Well, sure. And I mean, one of its biggest industries, John, is home building.
Yeah.
What are we hearing from the home building lobby about these crackdowns? That's something that would seem to be particularly a pocketbook issue.
Yeah, and we haven't heard much yet, but I think Will's right on track. There will be a time when we're going to see a backlash. I don't know that at least on the GOP side we've seen it yet, but there is going to be a point where industries like home building and agriculture and other industries that heavily rely on migrant workers, whether they're here illegally or illegally, are extremely important to those industries. And I think we're probably, 8 to 12 months out from when those industries start saying this is having a serious impact. That's going to probably happen before the midterm elections, and I think it will have a lot of Republicans who are in line right now. That will be sort of the beginning of the pushback that we see building up to the midterm elections.
It doesn't seem like there would be a lot of flexibility, though, politically, to move towards an embrace of illegal immigration, even if it does help from an economic standpoint. What's the out there for people who are taking such a firm stand on this?
Well, I mean, right now there's no out for anybody, at least on the GOP side. There's no room to have any daylight between you and the Trump administration on immigration policies. I don't think that will last forever. I see 180 days. As we get within a year of the midterms, I see there's going to be fractures within the GOP as people start lining up for those midterm elections. And this honeymoon period right now, where it seems like the Trump administration gets whatever it wants, especially on immigration, I don't know that will be the same, a year from now.
Mm-hmm. Ariel, one economic reality for these sheriffs, and they've mentioned it gently, I think, not necessarily as pushback, but then recognition that there aren't that many jail beds to be devoted to increased enforcement. And
Right.
both the St. Johns County Sheriff and TK Waters noted, one of the concerns that law enforcement has in this increased crackdown environment is how do we pay for housing these additional inmates? And
Right.
so that's something that might end up being an issue, but I think that that's part of the reason that Sheriff TK Waters said he wants to be a part of this so that he has a voice when it comes to discussing those things at the state level.
Right. And I mean, talking about Sheriff Hardwick, they don't have a federal facility down there in St. Johns County. So I'm sure there's drawbacks with that. And same with TK Waters. I learned in my reporting that last year they processed 2,000 people in their jail and 600 were ordered out of the country. So, I mean, it could lead to deportations. And I mean, I know there's concerns about people who are innocent, immigrants who are innocent people that might also be victims of this.
Get caught up in it. Yeah. And so, Tenikka, I mean, we're talking a lot about the, city and law enforcement perspective on this. Have we been hearing much from communities who are impacted by these threats of deportations or deportations? Are we hearing many local stories about people who are, worried or who in fact are being targeted and deported?
There are some for sure, and we've seen it nationally. I will say we have interviewed a local immigration attorney, Rebecca Black, and she mentioned with some of these proposals going in front of the council in terms of the mobile fingerprinting devices and things of this nature, she has concerns about racial profiling. And she also raised some concerns about how this could affect people who are seeking asylum. And she noted that there's not a visa for somebody from Honduras or Venezuela or Cuba that they could apply for that would provide them entry to come here to work. So she has raised some concerns from that community and things that she's hearing. And we know that there are different immigration attorneys who are being flooded with calls. A lot of people have a lot of questions about how it's going to impact them, how it will impact their families. So there's definitely real concern in the community.
And these mobile fingerprinting devices, I mean, they're just designed to be carried around in squad cars. Is that kind of the idea, to allow officers just doing a regular check to
quickly access that information? Yeah.
Interesting. And so that's about a $76,000 allocation, Ariel? Is that right?
They didn't quite make it clear, but they just said that it was just going to be funding. And I mean, when you're talking about a sheriff's office that has millions and I think billions of dollars in a budget, there's already, we've been hearing concerns from local people about just how big the budget is for the sheriff's office already.
Sure. Yeah, they're about half the city budget.
It is about 76,000 from the general fund. The ordinance, for people out there, it's ordinance 2025-147 if you want to read it. But 76,000 from the general fund from an economic grant activity program would be used to fund these fingerprinting devices. I find it interesting and fascinating that within a year, to John's point about how much things can change, Kevin Carrico went from, an ice cold believer and someone who is a believer of being a servant to all, to someone who has, in the first 5 words of this legislation, used dehumanizing language. Unauthorized, I'm not going to repeat the word, but instead of illegal immigrants or illegal migrants, we're using dehumanizing language. It's legal language, but to call someone what this bill says is not human language. So
I mean, I have noticed, John, there is definitely a return to the term alien to describe people who are not legally in this country, not just at the local level, but, I've been seeing it from the Department of Justice and a lot of the releases that they send us for arrests and indictments.
I mean, it's a rare moment in history. I mean, for folks like us who have studied political history over the years, I don't think in my lifetime I've seen a moment in history like this where some of the things that have happened at the national and local levels is occurring. But again, there's no guardrails right now. The Democratic Party, has been sort of toothless in any attempt to push back. So there's nothing really restraining. Again, as you pointed, some of the worst instincts that have, up until this moment in history have kind of been under the table or said behind closed doors. It seems the gloves are off, and there's really no limit to some of the things that we're seeing happening. There's been some really ugly stuff, and again, there may be, well, time will tell. There may be some positive impacts of some of the misery we're seeing now, but it does seem in many cases that misery and cruelty seems to be the point of a lot of what we're seeing. And I think at this point, the more liberals scream and holler and cry out, it just seems to embolden the people right now running the show.
If you're just joining us, it is our Friday Week in Review roundtable. We're talking to our panel of journalists about the stories of the week, and you are welcome to join our conversation. Give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org or reach out on social media. Just a couple comments I want to enter in. Michael emailing, Kevin Carrico needs to stick to his knitting instead of currying favor with the MAGA element of the council. John on Facebook, I think, responding to our discussion about not having workers that are undocumented, saying, I would love to have seen your argument when they proposed freeing the slaves. Same argument. We've also got a call from Tricia Booker, who is a frequent contributor here on the panel. Good morning, Tricia Booker. Go ahead.
Good morning. How are you?
Terrific.
I think it's worth pointing out that the definition of criminal has kind of been changed. I think a lot of people thought, oh, well, he's going to deport the undocumented criminals, which, of course, it was already illegal to be committing crimes in the United States. But I think the administration has redefined criminal to just mean anybody who is here without documents. And I think that has encompassed a whole population that the general public did not anticipate being on the chopping block. And I'll hang up with that.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Tricia. I mean, it is worth noting that being in the country without documentation is a misdemeanor. It's not, a felony crime, but a lot of discussion around an illegal presence in this country has broadly categorized people engaging in that behavior as criminals. And I guess that's sometimes a matter of perspective, Will.
Two things. I mean, if folks really want to go into the whole, let's make sure that people have the right documentation, they could go to a whole lot of college towns with a whole lot of college students who don't always have the right documentation because they're trying to act like they're 21 when they're not. One. Two, when the person mentioned what I would have thought when it came to freeing the slaves. All I'll say is, last night I read something this week that noted that shared that literally some of the 40 acres that were supposed to go to black people were actually part of the eastern seaboard, including parts of what we now call Jacksonville. So, the United States has often had these lofty ideals, doesn't always live up to them. And when it comes to immigration, whether it was Eastern Europeans coming to Ellis Island or the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 or Japanese internment in the 1940s, we say a lot of things. Our reality isn't always what we hope to be.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I'd like to move on now, if we can, to a topic that has been getting a lot of discussion around town. This is a land swap that would allow for, well, it's complicated, Tenikka. Basically, it would allow for UNF to acquire some land through the city. The city would provide this property to them by getting land from a local developer via a land swap. Can you kind of help us navigate a little bit what that involves and why it's become controversial?
Yeah, it's almost like a game show, buy or swap, right? So this is involving the new UF grad campus that's coming to downtown Jacksonville. It's been in the works for a bit. And so the swap part of this concept is there is a building and some property in La Villa, the Interline building off of West Bay Street, owned by Gateway Jacks. Gateway Jacks would give that building and a couple acres around it to the city. And theoretically, that means that the UF grad students could start classes, some of them as early as August. In exchange, the city would give Gateway Jacks prime real estate off of the riverfront, the area that we know formally, as the Landing. So that's the swap part of it, and they would develop it. They're talking multi-use, residential, places to eat, places to drink, office buildings. Councilman Ron Salem says, wait a minute, not so fast. Not a big fan of this swap concept. He says, I want to propose legislation that says, why don't we just buy the building outright and then give it to UF? So the DIA met Wednesday. They discussed it, and ultimately the majority voted in favor of this land swap deal. It's not a done deal yet. It does obviously have to go to council, but some of the concerns that were raised about it is the timeline moving too fast? Do we really know enough details about what Gateway Jacks is going to do? Is the city going to get a return on the investment? Folks who are in support of it say we get people downtown, which is critical to development, and also we finally get some movement. We're developing our real estate, our riverfront again, which is prime real estate. There were also some questions about the value. With Ron Salem's proposed legislation, he's saying, let's buy the building, and we can start negotiations at around $4 million, which is what Gateway Jacks paid for that building last year. Gateway Jacks is now saying, hey, this property is valued around $8 million now. So there's some talk that maybe, according to the DIA and the city, obviously the Deegan administration supports this. They say that roughly about $5.5 million. They believe it might be like a relatively even exchange. But again, this is far from over. Council will be talking about this further. They should be taking it up in May. We might know something by the summer, so that would give UF time to be able to potentially have those students in, again, as early as August. So a lot of concern and some debate about the potential use of taxpayer dollars, because the city has already committed tens of millions of dollars to attract that campus to downtown.
Right. And one of the issues being, I mean, the city has agreed to spend, a chunk of $50 million. They've committed another $50 million. So that's, cash money, but they've also committed to providing this land to UF to incentivize them to come here. And the question being, kind of at what point is it a worthwhile return on investment? Lori Boyer at the DIA seems to think that this particular property, the Interline building on Bay Street, is essential. She actually said she didn't think that this whole project would happen without it, which is, I think, was surprising to some people that would be so necessary.
No, absolutely. I think it's also interesting. There were questions about when you talk about the return on the investment, they noted some of the folks involved in the potential development of the riverfront have had successful projects in Tampa and DC, citing that. But there are definitely still some concerns. But yeah, this being prime real estate, and I think it's just an interesting conversation about what is the true value of this building and this property, because, $4 million to roughly $10 million, that's a big difference. And people want to feel like, if we're going to give up this land on the riverfront, to develop it, you want to make sure that you're getting your money's worth and that it is a fair exchange. And it sounds like the DIA believes that it is.
Right. Although, Will, I mean, you've covered business in downtown for a long time as well. The DIA was actually kind of waiting for some reports back on, options for these riverfront parcels. And, it's been described as kind of the doormat of downtown. I mean, it's where the Landing was. It is a very iconic spot. And a lot of people have a lot of interest in how that looks.
There is a lot of interest in how the former Landing looks. It just seems like this is one of those instances where Jacksonville's almost on the cusp of something, and then it's Jacksonville is Jacksonville, and then there's always like details. It's like, oh wait, we hadn't thought of this, and it's hopefully Jacksonville can emerge from its previous past of coming close to developing something and then not quite getting there to the way that we envision.
Yeah, and Ariel, we know that the developer has said that even if this land swap does occur, that they probably would need $20 million in incentives,
right,
completion grants, to actually execute their proposal for this, residential hotel complex.
Right. I mean, construction is expensive. We've seen deals fall through before because the costs were just getting too high.
On this very parcel.
Correct. So yeah, I mean, it's valid. I mean, you need money to build stuff, and building stuff is more expensive.
Yeah. John, where does this fit in your mind into sort of the overall downtown plan for revitalizing the urban core?
I mean, I'm not against incentives to bring targeted businesses to downtown. I think that works in a lot of cities, and it has worked in Jacksonville. And I don't. And obviously, as Tenikka pointed out, this is a very complex deal, and I certainly don't know all the details about it. But from a big picture level, my big problem is spending, giving up taxpayer assets like land and taxpayer incentives to try and bring new office stuff. I know they said it's a multi-use property and it will include some residential, but it will also include a lot of office space. And for me, you're looking at a downtown right now that's got almost 8 million square feet of vacant office space. Channel 4 reported last month that it has almost a 20% vacancy rate, and it's rising. I'm skeptical of any city incentive deal that seeks to pay taxpayer money to add office space downtown when we have a huge vacancy problem with office space downtown. I'd much rather see them looking for a deal that involves using currently vacant space instead of building a new skyscraper that will add new office space to an area that is really got a huge vacancy problem.
Yeah, I mean, as you've noted, there's even a push to try to transfer or transform some of these existing vacant spaces into something else.
Yeah.
Just to get them into use.
So again, I'm sure that the deal is complex and it has a lot of moving parts that I'm not aware of. But just philosophically, it doesn't seem like pursuing new office space downtown should be a priority for those trying to revitalize downtown.
Got a call from Linda in Mandarin. Good morning, Linda. Go ahead.
Good morning. I think the reason that, as Will says, we're always on the precipice of almost becoming a city is because Jacksonville has never had an overarching vision of what they want the end result to look like. So each administration puts their imprint, and we have people trying to negotiate with people who we can lure to downtown, and we negotiate from the premise of their little project. So we don't have an overarching that surpasses each administration. And on top of that, I think the guy from Gateway already is developing 20 blocks. He's got a $4 million, and he's using his leverage to get what he wants. But incentives, I thought, were to get somebody to lure people to downtown or to a particular part of town. He's already downtown. You're going to give him riverfront property and another $20 million? No. Okay, Interline building, he had the foresight to buy it. Let him keep it, and let's try to work out something else with US, because to me, the land alone on the riverfront is worth more than the $4 million he paid, and then you need another $20 million in incentives. That's going to take money from actually encouraging someone else to come to town, because we've invested millions in incentives for the 20 blocks he's already, and I love him that he's trying to do something, but just do what you do. And Lori Boyer, go back to the drawing board, please, because we don't need to give riverfront property to somebody and incentives. He gets the land or nothing. You don't give him $20 million on top of that. That's my.
Thanks, Linda. Appreciate it. We also got an email from Ricardo. He says, I read the tributary reporting on this. It questions the assessed values the city and DIA are using to soften the deal. The fortuitous timing of the purchase by Gateway also sounds suspicious. Looks like another giveaway to Gateway. And I guess that's a reference to the fact that this land was acquired kind of in the timeline roughly where the city was also negotiating with UF to come to La Villa. And that I know that the developer has said that their negotiations for the Interline building well predated the city's deal with UF. But that has raised questions. And got a call from Jason in San Marco. Good morning, Jason. Go ahead.
Good morning, and thank you. Yeah, I'm just double checking. Is this the same University of Florida where the former president, Ben Sass, spent $7 million on consultants to help him learn how to run a university? And I also say that the concept of building more office space downtown that's a loser from the get-go. Thanks for taking my call.
Thanks, Jason. I want to move on now to a topic that is actually quite timely, although it is a historic one as well. There is an historic marker that's going to be placed this morning at the site of a racially motivated murder from 1964. Will, you're going to head out in just a couple minutes to cover this. Can you give us just a little recap of the murder of Johnnie Mae Chappell and the events that surrounded it?
In March 1964, Johnnie Mae Chappell was, in the way her children described it, going out to get some ice cream for her children and was murdered. It was it later came out that there were 4 people in a car who approached her and literally killed her for sport. And 3 of them, only one of them served any time in prison. And so her family, she was a mother of 10. She was a wife and a mother, and her family was devastated because for years they didn't really have answers. This marker will be established to help further memorialize Mrs. Chappell. I spoke with her youngest child, Shelton, who was months old when she was killed, and I remember I asked him how much it just devastated the whole family. She was the glue of the family, is the way Shelton described it, and incidentally, I met Shelton at the site of another tragedy, the Dollar General shooting in Grand Park in 2023. That's where I met him. And in the years since, the Chappell family has met with other survivors of incidents of white racial terror, including the Till family. And they have just grieved together over the years. So today will be a very poignant moment for the Chappell family.
And Shelton has worked over the years to bring justice to this case, reopen the investigation, called for, grand jury investigations. Even the family, initiated a civil suit at one point, and that was not successful. But the circumstances around this murder were troubling because, the murder itself received very little attention. There was a lot of race controversy and even some rioting that was happening at that time. But the police never assigned anyone to investigate this murder, and it was almost solved by accident by a couple of detectives who took up the case when they learned about it. But it was not a priority of the administration at the time.
No, and that was emblematic of Jacksonville in 1964. I mean, this past Sunday was the anniversary of the Klan putting a bomb in a Murray Hill home to stop school integration. And that was something that that the law enforcement also slowly pursued over the years because it wasn't really an interest to them. It wasn't something that was really covered in the Times Union and media at the time. So there wasn't like pressure on these governmental agencies to do what they should do by all their citizens. And obviously, there's a lot of tension in St. Augustine. So, I mean, Northeast Florida in 1964, tensions were extraordinarily high. And this was all leading up to, as we know, the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
Mm-hmm. Well, Will, I know that you've got to get to the unveiling of this memorial, so we're going to let you bounce, and we'll look for your photographs at jackstoday.org.
I'm looking forward to it. Thanks so much for joining us, including my son's favorite journalist, Tenikka Smith-Hughes.
Thanks, Will.
I love being.
Tenikka, Will mentioned Emmett Till, who was obviously a tragic case, but one that the family deliberately publicized what had happened to him to emphasize the horrors of lynching. And this case has a little bit of a similar coda in that there was just one picture that the family had of Johnnie Mae Chappell, and it was a picture of her after she'd been killed with her husband standing over her.
Absolutely. And for that reason, Emmett Till's mother, Mamie Till, she wanted that open casket photo. And that image helped to spark legislation. It helped to drive the civil rights movement because some people hadn't really seen the true horrors of racism. And it gave the country, and it actually went global, a firsthand look. And so this was similar. You imagine that your only image that you have of your loved one is them in that state after they're dead. I know Will talked about speaking to the son, Shelton. In his journey, he mentioned how that murder ripped their family apart. He ended up in foster care, and her husband died in 1995. So he said this recognition should have happened a long time ago. And you just think about, even we cover crime and murder here all the time, and the way these types of things can just destroy lives. And you just think about the impact of what that did to that family, having to face this decades of, talked about the investigation being slow roll and essentially her being forgotten. I do think it is worth noting that Rockmon Johnson and Nick Hallen partnered on this to push this
Both city
forward.
council members.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
pushed this forward.
And that's sort of a unique alliance. I mean, we should say that there are not a lot of bills that you'll see coming out of council co-sponsored by Rockman Johnson and Nick Howland. They're both of different political parties, different political persuasions, and usually very much kind of on opposite sides of things.
Yeah, and Howland acknowledged that Johnson educated him on Johnnie Mae's story, and that made him want to take this action and be a part of this action because he wasn't really aware of her story. And so I think this marker is significant. It is that reminder that for her family, for her loved ones, and I know they talked about it's just important because I know Rockmon Johnson said it's more than a symbol; it's a promise that history will not be forgotten. And we have to acknowledge that history, even though it's painful and difficult. And so I think that's important for the family to have some level of closure, some level of acknowledgement about their mom's life and what happened to their family.
And certainly Shelton Chappell will be there today at that dedication. A lot of folks from the city will be there as well. Is there any, does it offer anything to the larger community, this recognition and this monument in honor of Johnnie Mae Chappell, outside of just for the family?
I think so. I mean, you think about, we have a grand example is the Museum of African American History in Washington, D.C., to be able to look back at these parts of our history, because Black history is a part of American history, and even the tragedies. There are memorials for Emmett Till. We have these markers. I think it's important to know this is something that happened here. You think about Axe Handle Saturday that happened here in Jacksonville. We have murals that mark that. These are events that need to be documented because it's important for people to understand. If Nick Howland says, "Hey, I didn't know about it." You think about how many locals who didn't know Johnnie Mae's story, and so this is a way for people to get educated and say what happened to her and learn more about her. And I think that I can't necessarily speak on behalf of the family, but I would hope that they would appreciate people wanting to know who their mother was and more about the life that she lived and the life that was taken away from her. Especially given the way that she died. I think that she deserves to be remembered and her life deserves to be honored in this way. So I think it's important for the community as a whole.
And Ariel, we know that, there was widely seen kind of judicial failures or failures of the criminal justice system when it came to this case. We haven't talked much about it, but the 4 men that were involved in this murder were white men. There was an all-white jury that convicted one of them of a lesser charge of manslaughter instead of first-degree murder.
Right.
He was sentenced to 10 years but served 3 before being released, and charges against all of the other 3 men were dropped. Does that story seem, held in amber, or does that seem to have resonance in the current criminal justice system and conversations people are having about race and inequality?
I mean, it's definitely a valid question. We do have, we do see issues with institutional racism across the board, and that's something that I think our country is still dealing with today. And, like this happened, in the 60s, and it really wasn't that long ago. And I mean, the fact that we're still dealing with some of the problems that happened back then today, I mean, it's unfortunate.
Well, that happens at 10 o'clock today, and obviously there'll be a lot of coverage of it, including from our own Will Brown. So we'll look forward to seeing that. I want to move on now, John, to a topic, a poll that came out earlier this week, conducted by the University of North Florida. They do kind of regular check-ins with the community and the state on issues of significance. Were there any big surprises to you in this poll? I mean, what were the headlines to you when you were looking at the numbers?
Well, a lot of attention on the poll that came out from UNF focused on the question in there about Casey DeSantis running for governor and the high number she got, which was interesting. But as I looked at it hard, I really think it was irrelevant in my mind. I really sincerely don't believe Casey DeSantis will end up running for governor, mostly because I think she's an extremely smart lady, and I don't think she's going to put herself in a position to be embarrassed in a GOP primary by the MAGA base the way her husband was. I think her instincts and those around her will eventually convince her, if they haven't already, that she's not going to be in that position. As long as Susie Wiles is still Trump's number one advisor, I just don't see the MAGA base getting behind either Ron or Casey. And it's part of why you see Ron DeSantis increasingly becoming, having trouble corralling his traditional Republican support in Tallahassee. But
Can I
think,
just pause you there and ask you to kind of break down the Susie Wiles comment that you're making there?
I'm
Explain
sorry,
that for
yeah.
people who don't know
So
who she is. or-
it's definitely a political insider kind of thing. But there's long running bad blood history between Susie Wiles, who is a very well known, especially here locally, because she's from our area. I've worked on campaigns with Susie. The bad blood between Wiles and the DeSantis camp is very well known with inside political circles, and I think most people assume that as long as Susie's got a leading voice inside the Trump administration,
where she's chief of staff right now. Yeah.
the DeSantis camp is always going to have trouble, getting a real strong support from Trump's MAGA base.
Okay. So the discussion this week around Casey, she did have some pretty good, support. 57% of the GOP have favorable impressions of her. But just yesterday, go ahead.
But I was going to say, just days later, Trump came out and endorsed Congressman Byron Donaldson, South Florida congressional person, and that kind of, if it wasn't intended to throw cold water on the news about Casey, it certainly achieved that purpose. I think it's clear that the Trump camp is saying, they're not going to be behind a Casey DeSantis run, and I think to me it really creates a very interesting scenario that I see setting up in Florida. Very well-known personal injury celebrity John Morgan has been teasing a run, not as a Democrat, but in a third-party run under something he has called the Capitalist Party. I think this could, for 2026, this could create an extremely interesting scenario where you have the Democratic Party in Florida is still foundering. They still haven't really shown that they have an answer for DeSantis or MAGA. And I think Florida could become a really interesting test laboratory for the national scene if you have a self-funded John Morgan running under his created capitalist party. He's talking about running on the 2026 ballot for governor. You would have GOP and Democrat candidates emerging from very expensive, very bruising primaries to face a self-funded, very well-known John Morgan, who's talking about running on platforms like legalizing recreational marijuana, legalizing prostitution, a number of other very populist things, which would be designed to attract the working class, middle, the voters who left the Democratic Party last year. He's talking about appealing to that group, plus some conservative Republicans who aren't necessarily on board with MAGA. This is a guy who spends $350 million a year on positive name ID already. He would
Sure, there's billboards all over the state with his face on it.
It would be a very interesting, and if that model that he's setting up, there's only one party over the last 5 to 10 years that has actually increased numbers, and that's the Independent Party. Both of the legacy traditional Democrats and Republicans have been bleeding voters over the last 10 years. Morgan is in a position to show that we are moving past the dominant two-party system, and he might be able to prove that in the 2026 governor's race.
I mean, you anticipate that the the recreational marijuana effort will also resurface, which that's been a big issue for him.
I mean, he was one of the main movers and shakers for the one that failed just recently, just barely failed, but it got over 60% of voters. Imagine a ballot in November of 2026 where Morgan is on the ballot and recreational marijuana is on the ballot to bring out a lot of people who love him because of his traditional support for that. It like I said, I'm following this through, and of course anything can happen in politics, and there's a lot of things have to fall in place. But that, from a political junkie standpoint, that scenario is really interesting to me.
And Tenikka, John talks about, who would be on the ballot, but certainly there's this presence of Donald Trump on the ballot with an endorsement. I mean, he said in his post on Truth Social that Byron Donalds would be his choice, that he supported him. He he posted something, go run, Byron, run is what he said. He'd be a great and powerful governor for Florida and he'll have my complete and total endorsement. According to this poll, 66% of the people polled had never heard of Byron Donalds. But I guess you could say something similar for Governor Ron DeSantis before he got the support of, I mean, he wasn't unknown, but he certainly was not as considered as viable.
And let's face it, people might not know about him, but with that seeming endorsement, people will know about him. One thing that I also think is interesting, Dr. Michael Bender had pointed out as far as Casey DeSantis is concerned, that when they did some Republican primary candidates, when they were polling back in 2023, her name came up even then because she already had that built-in name recognition. And so I do think that's interesting, and we'll see how much the president's post will elevate Byron's profile.
Fascinating. Well, Ariel Schiller, John Daigle, Tenikka Hughes, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be back in just a minute.
Terrell Hogan Law.
I'm Wayne Hogan. Car accidents happen too often for your family to go unprotected. Uninsured motorist insurance. When you need it, will you have it?
More at TerrellHoganLaw.com. Sing Out Loud Festival presents the Live Wildly Showcase with Hozier, Biba Doobie, Vance Joy, Father John Misty, and more. September 20th and 21st in downtown St. Augustine. More information at singoutloudfestival.com.
On the next Fresh Air, actor Andrew Scott. He first became known in the U.S. as the Hot Priest because of his role in Fleabag. Now he's nominated for a SAG Award for his starring role in the Netflix series Ripley, adapted from the novel The Talented Mr. Ripley. He won a National Society of Film Critics Award for his performance in All of Us Strangers. Join us
Today at 1 on WJCT News 89.9.
On the next Florida Roundup, a cross-country conversation about home insurance. Florida and California have been facing rising insurance premiums and natural disasters. The Los Angeles wildfires are just the latest tragic reminder of how our insurance markets are interconnected. So we're teaming up again with our colleagues in San Francisco to talk about what's working and what's not with home insurance. What do you want homeowners in California to know about paying to protect your home here in the Sunshine State? Email us now, radio@thefloridaroundup.org. I'm Tom Hudson. Then join us Friday noon until 1.
Dojeball? Under pressure, the White House admits Elon Musk has no statutory authority.
He is a special government employee, and the agencies are directing the cuts of the wasteful spending.
Another week of upheaval sees the doors close, then reopen at one presidential library. Meanwhile, the administration scrambles to rehire hundreds of nuclear weapons workers. We get to all of it on the Friday News Roundup, next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, romance, drama, unforgettable music, all taking center stage at Alhambra for their new musical production of West Side Story. Joining me to talk about it is the show's director, Todd Booth, former owner of Alhambra. Welcome, Todd.
How are you? Thank you for inviting us today.
I'm very glad to have you. Braden Schilling, who plays the lead role of Tony. Welcome, Braden.
Hello, happy to be here.
And Lauren Henriquez, who plays the lead role of Maria. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for being here. Maria, I want to ask you, or Lauren, I want to ask you about this because it is such an iconic role.
Yeah.
Was it the kind of thing that you knew well growing up, seeing as a kid, or is it something that you only became familiar with as an adult when you were in the theater?
I didn't start doing theater really until high school, and freshman year of high school was when I fell in love with West Side Story and when I knew that Maria was a dream role for me.
Yeah.
So I didn't really grow up in a musical household. So I kind of came into finding West Side Story on my own.
And what about it made your dream role?
It was the first song I ever worked with my first voice teacher.
Which was?
I Feel Pretty.
Okay. And that's one of the classics of
Classic.
This. So many
Yeah.
classics in this, Todd. It must just be so fun to immerse yourself in it. How do you approach it with, this young cast, make it fresh, even though it's, it is a classic?
I've done the show 4 or 5 times, so it was really fun to put together this group of people. These kids are just so talented, so energetic, and so enthusiastic that it really made it fun, really made it an adventure. Casting is so important. I think we did a good job with it. They just bring something of themselves to each of the roles. And again, we're playing it for a contemporary audience. And the show was written, I think, in 1959. So it was really a challenge. But these kids bring the authenticity to it, of these characters. And the time, the period in time that this took place when they had these rivalries between the gangs. And we've had a good time. I think we have a good production.
What are you looking for when they're auditioning? What kind of spark do you need to see in your Tony or your Maria?
It's hard to explain. We have to have voices, of course. We have to visually capture these people as to what the audience is going to expect, and then we go beyond that. That's our attempt, to always go beyond what the audience is trying to expect. And we got that with the beautiful Lauren here. And this man who sings like a birdie. I mean, he has the pipes galore.
Braden, how did you get into musical theater?
Yeah, same as Lauren. I didn't really grow up with the theater, but like in high school, I started sophomore year, and my first show was West Side Story.
Wow.
And I didn't play Tony, but I always wanted to.
Who did you play?
Oh, well, I was in this little small town in Indiana, so we didn't really have that many.
He played the furniture.
Yeah, I played the furniture. No, I played Chino in it, but I would never play that again. But I always wanted to be Tony after that, because the music and just Maria, the just all of the songs, all of the music always just spoke to me.
Yeah, it is a really fun thing to perform in.
Yeah.
And Tony's character really is just sort of an exploration of, like, trying to cope with all of these, good and bad influences and characters, and find the right path. It's a tragic story, though. I mean, it's sort of the Romeo and Juliet tale.
Yeah. No, 100%.
Yeah. And Lauren, you have done some work in terms of trying to make theater experiences more inclusive. Can you kind of talk about how you got involved in that and what it is that you work on?
Yeah, I volunteer for Broadway Cares Equity Fights AIDS in New York. I also, in college, was the head of our theater and dance service fraternity. So we did a bunch of volunteer work, and I started our first ever Disability Alliance Club in our theater program, because I just think inclusion and making sure that everybody feels safe working in the theater is one of the most important aspects of theater, because theater is meant to bring people together, and it might as well be a safe space to bring people together.
Yeah. Todd, you've been around for a long time in this business and in this city, doing theater. Everybody knows your name and your reputation. How do you think it's changed in the time that you've been working in the theater locally?
I came here 40 years ago. I bought the theater because it's so cute. I was running the Drury Lane theaters in Chicago, which were big. The smallest one was 1,000 seats. And when I came here, I just fell in love with the small intimacy of the theater. And I also found some things, like there had never been a black person on stage. So I started doing one black show a year. Wow. We did a show called Chorus Line, and a gay character was on stage. I was picketed.
Really?
In Jacksonville.
Wow.
So then the next year did La Cage aux Folles. And pretty soon we realized that we had a base out there that was never attracted to the theater. And what we did is found ways to bring them in. I bought the theater in '84. It was doing about $700,000 a year in sales. 2 years later, we went to $2.75 million. And I was chosen the Entrepreneur of the Year in the city of Jacksonville by the Business Journal. Why? Because we made it so inclusive to every part of the city. And we did our best to facilitate that cross-section of the city all coming together for one purpose. And they sit down next to somebody, and we had some ethnic people at this table and Mr. White and his wife on this table, and all of a sudden they started talking to each other. The big thing in the city in the 40 years was the emergence of the Jaguars.
Yeah.
When all of a sudden 50 black millionaires moved to town. And I think that was very instrumental in the development of the city as a true community.
So interesting. We're going to have to leave it there. The show opens tonight at Alhambra. It runs through March 30th.
Correct.
I'm sure it's going to be a lot of fun. There's more information at alhambrajax.com. Break a leg, you guys.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for being here. And thank you for listening. If you have any feedback or suggestions, you can send either to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. Join us Monday when we discuss teen dating violence and talk to a survivor who shares how she moved on and how others can help. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Sing Out Loud Festival presents the Live Wildly Showcase with Hosier, Biba Doobie, Vance Joy, Father John Misty, and more. September 20th and 21st in downtown St. Augustine. More information at singoutloudfestival.com. The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.